again, an experienced speaker, Soundary, who has been at this conference several times, and I love her demonstration from tennis world, from a Russian player, Medvedev, who told a story about Novak Djokovic, if I remember correctly. That was a great demonstration of understanding that story. It doesn't have any like nation or race, or it's just universal. So Soundary, I would love to see you online. Soundary is going to share that how leaders are connecting us in organizations, and not only in organizations.
Tim.
It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. How is the connection? Is it good?
Let me ask the crowd, guys, if the connection is great and you're looking forward to it, give us some fire. Let's see. I guess it's raging. It's all good. So it's great to see you. I'll just launch your slides and we'll be off the air. So thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Tim, for building this bridge of connection across borders for all of us to share and learn. I think there's some magic in this connection as well, which makes me want to keep coming back. So, it's really nice to be back here. So back in, 1992, when I'm dating myself, maybe because of that, I just finished the last of my MBA exams, and we were waiting for the graduation ceremony. And while we were doing it, one of my friends, he belonged to this place called Shillong. It's in the northeastern part of India. And he was going back. He was not going to stay for the graduation because he already had his job offer, and he needed some time with his parents. So my eagerness to go to that trip was manyfold, other than the holiday and going with my friends and all that. But it was also to see these bridges. They're called the root bridges. They are made out of rubber fig trees. It's naturally made. And I think it dates back to a time when people were trekking through thick forests and negotiating fast-flowing rivers and all that. And they were doing it as part of routine. So there was nature's bridge, which was right there. And I wanted to see this. But we didn't have great cameras. We didn't have great access at that time. So this is actually from a friend who did this trip just a couple of weeks back. So these root bridges are the connecting points there, nature's own way of establishing these connections. And the double-decker bridge, so you can see the single deck and the double-deck. The double-decker bridge is also unique because it is like, obviously very unusual, right? To have two levels of natural bridge. It's not a concrete bridge which is made with double-decker, but it's also obviously took years to develop. It's a botanical architecture which took years to develop. And that is significant because I think it is not just that bridges are about connections. It's also about the fact that connections take years to develop. Now, when we move on from nature to human beings building connections, I want to talk about this person called Dasarath Manji. He's also called the Mountain Man. He was born in 1934, and he was in a financially backward family in a place called Gailor village in Bihar, which is in northern part of India. He ran away from his home when he was young to work in coal mines in a place called Dhanbad. And after many years, he returned back to his village and he married this lady by the name of Falguni Devi. Now, these hills had a very tight grip on those villages, and access was very, very difficult. You couldn't travel. So anytime anybody wanted to go somewhere, they had to travel hundreds of kilometers to go to nearby villages or districts or anywhere. Now, in 1959, Manji's wife got seriously injured after falling from the mountain in the nearest town. At that time, there was no road between the mountains, so she couldn't be rushed to the hospital. and sadly, she passed away. So after his wife's demise, Manji was really distraught. He was angry, he was upset, and he said, I'm going to carve a path across the mountains single-handedly. And he said, this will help the villagers. So what if it doesn't help me? It will help the villagers get better medical care. And people laughed at him when he started the work because he used only a chisel and a hammer. But he continued to work for 22 years, starting from 1960 to 1982, and he carved a path between these mountains. And created a road which was 360 feet long. And what was earlier a 54 kilometer distance to travel became a 15-kilometer distance. Amazing, right? There's this human who's like chipping away the mountain and creating a road. Takes him 20 years, but he does it. Now, I just want to stop for a minute and ask you, what does connector mean to you? What does the word connector mean to you? If you can just share in the comments, that'll be great. We talked about nature's connection. We talked about a human who did some connections. So what does the word connector mean to you? And while you're doing that, while you're posting your comments on the chat, let me talk about Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. A lot of you might have read about the book, a lot of you had read the book itself. And one of the things that was really intriguing was during the pandemic, a lot of people were great at staying in touch with their strongest ties. So we were getting in touch with our immediate team members. We were directly looking at our, direct reports, our closest clients. But we somehow lost touch with all those serendipitous connections that can happen. The connections where you are like randomly bumping into people, finding some way to collaborate, building on, those weaker ties to create some connections. And Adam, part of his book, had done a research. The research goes like this. There was an experiment that was done, and an organization tried randomly matching 2 salespeople for a weekly lunch. The lunches had no particular agenda. They did it for a month. During the course of the entire month, they randomly, placed people together. Now, 4 months later, the average salesman in that organization who was part of this experiment had 24% higher revenue. Why do you think that happens? Again, please keep the comments coming on the chat. Why do you think, just after a lunch, the connections are building up? And why do you think the sales revenue goes up? Any thoughts on that? I don't know if raised hand means somebody wants to say something. Tim, or would they be just, I'm happy for people to unmute and share or put it on the comments to away. And let me just carry on for now because we have a really short time together today. When you have no agenda with your peers, you learn from each other, like how we are doing today and over the 3 days in this conference. You share tacit knowledge. You end up feeling so much more connected with them. You feel, I have a lunch buddy, I didn't know before, but I'm getting to know them now. And this helps that having some shared goals, some common interest, helping each other out really helps increase sales. So there's this lady, Siobhan McCall. She's the Executive General Manager of People and Culture and Change at Dulex Group, which is the paint company. And she says that the most impactful leaders are stepping into the role of connectors to create a sense of care and belonging in hybrid teams. Connectors align people around purpose, roles, and goals to enable the highest level of performance. So as a leader, you're connecting people, you're connecting to people, you're connecting ideas, and you're connecting conversations. So I want to build on this and really spend the next 15 minutes. And this idea came to me from Tim's messages and our exchange of conversation about talking about building bridges. We'll talk about 5 types of bridges that are built during a regular course of a workday. One is the bridges within us. Two, bridges between people and groups. Bridges between top management and employees. Three, bridges between teams. Four, and bridges between companies. And we will touch about all these 5 different kind of bridges as we go along. And again, feel free to, share your thoughts on the comments as we continue on this. So what does bridges within us mean? And some of you may know this person. He's Arne Sorensen. He was the CEO of Marriott International. And as you can see in the picture, 2 very different looks for him. So this was the look before the pandemic, and this was his look during the pandemic. And what had happened was that unfortunately he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and he was taking treatment. And then the pandemic happened, and he wanted to be there in front, talking to his team, talking to his employees. He didn't want to disconnect with them. He wanted to stay connected. So what he did is he came up on a video talking to them about the situation. Imagine March 2020, when nobody knew what the hell was going on, except for the fact that, especially as a hotel industry, as a hospitality industry, everything was going downhill. That's about all people knew. So he comes out and delivers a personal message, and his entire team tells him, no, don't go on video. It's not a good idea. It's not a good look. Don't go on video. And he says, no, this is what I am now. And I am going through treatment. He acknowledges that. He talks to calls them his Marriott associates, talks to them and tells them that don't worry about this look. We are going to work together and we are going to go past this crisis. We are here together to make this happen. And then he goes on to chart out a path of how he is going to do it, and then leaves them with a feeling of hope, saying, manufacturing facilities are slowly opening. We are going to see travel. Things are going to build up. So I have a sense of hope. So as somebody who's going through this, he still decides to take that courage, show humility, show his vulnerability, and come out and be there and build the bridge between himself and employees, but only because he was able to build that bridge within himself first. Not to be ashamed by the look, not to be ashamed by what's happening, but going out there and having a thought and having a conversation. So I want you to think about, again, please feel free to use the chat and talk about it. What are some of the bridges that we need to build within ourselves as we go to work, as we go to change mindsets, as we go to build hope, as we are moving along in the world that is there today? And the world is a Barney world. It's a difficult world. It's brittle. It's anxious. It's non-linear. It's incomprehensible. I mean, we can't put a picture to it and say, this is how the world is going to be. It's changing. But what can we do to build that bridge within us, get that resilience, get that courage, get that vulnerability to go out and be there? The second bridge that I want to talk about is bridges between people and groups. A lot of the times I do a lot of work around culture, and I see that those who lead change, they are the ones who are taking the first step to do that step and sort out and shape the culture. And even when there is conflict, we have to find creative ways of bringing about change and influencing action. So this is Anne-Sophie Claus. She runs a company called The Female Company, which works on creating female hygiene products. And she's based out of Germany. Now, in Germany, in 2018, there was a thing called tampon tax. And most of you would know what a tampon is, so I'm not going to go ahead and describe it. Otherwise, you can Google it. The tampon tax was classified as a tampon as a luxury product, and it taxed it at 19%, which is a staggering big amount. So Anne-Sophie Claus and her teams tried more than a year to work on raising awareness that this is just not right. And the reason it's not right is in Germany, for instance, they had 7% tax applied to caviar, to truffles, and even oil paintings, Whereas a hygiene product like tampon, a female hygiene product, required to be taxed at 19%. So she did a campaign. She collected signatures from people. Over 190,000 people signed the campaign, but it didn't make any difference. The German finance minister said that they wouldn't support the reduction of tax because he couldn't be sure if the companies will pass on the benefits to the consumers. And then she realized, oh, this is not going to change. I have had all this conversation, I've had this talk. I need to find another way to influence action. So what she does is they create, she had an online store already. They create a 46-page book inside which they put in 15 tampons. And because it's a book, it gets taxed at only 7%. The first printing of the tampon book was sold out in a day. The second one was sold out in a week. So she created a way to circumvent the system, but in a creative way, in taking on the government, taking on these groups which were against the thought and the policy, but coming up with a creative idea. In fact, they went to Cannes and they got an award for being one of those bold, irreverent, smart, and direct ads as well. So what couldn't change by collecting signatures, she decided to really create this movement where it became a book, it became part of a book. So the government had to follow the rules and allow her to do it. So she took out her indignation, her frustration, and created a story that people could buy and share. And the interesting part of it is, of course, by buying and using the book, you're able to visualize the problem. And it's a creative way to also take care of discrimination. So when you're faced with people who are stereotyping issues, who are biased, who are creating these problems, how can you come up with a creative way of tackling it while all other ways don't seem to be working? So I want you to think about areas in your work where you could be building bridges across conflicts. One way of dealing with the conflict is to go head on and go brash and, take the tough route. Might work. A lot of the times it doesn't, because when you do a push, what you get is a push back. You don't get lured into the conversation. So think about times at your work when there have been conflicts, when there have been situations where, you had to deal with different people with different approaches. How can you find a way to cohesively push your cause, influence action? Stories could be one way to build those bridges. I hope you're with me till now. Any thoughts, any questions? Okay, great. I see a lot of fires. So I hope you're just listening and taking it all in. I know it gets like, a day of a conference. You'll need to listen to all of it. I hope you're making notes of these stories as well. Thank you. I'll just move on to talk about the next type of bridge, which is bridge between top management and employees. And this is something that we always have a problem with, right? Maybe the top management is somebody sitting on an ivory tower, sitting on the top room and all that, and they have no idea of what's going on in the ground. They don't have an ear to the ground and things like that. So one of the ways of doing it is actually moving around, what used to be traditionally called management by walking around. So even something like a CEO who every time a visitor comes to his cabin, walks the visitor to the door of the building, to the gate or wherever, and says bye. That's setting a tone of how you want a CEO to behave and not just sit in their ivory tower in their top cubicle. And we saw a lot of these breaking hierarchy kind of situations. So I want to share about Andy Billings, what he shared about somebody that he met. Andy Billings used to be till recently, till Feb 2023, was the head of profitable creativity at Electronic Arts, also known as EA, the gaming company. During his early days with EA, he worked as a consultant, and one of his clients was this person called Monty, who was in the engineering department. Now, one day, Andy decides to visit Monty and goes to his office and finds that the office is empty. Now, next day, next to his office, he finds the admin, Monty's admin, sitting there. And he says, "Where's Monty?" And the admin just rolls her eyes. And Apparently, in an industry where most people came dressed in jeans and t-shirt, Monty was the formal kind. So he would wear his jacket and all and go. So the admin takes Andy around and shows him through a different part of the studio, EA studio, a place where there are broken up bottles, pizza boxes, scattered computer parts, and all. And there, amidst all that, he finds Monty sitting there. So Andy asks Monty, "What are you doing here?" And Monty says, "I have all my materials, all that I need at my desk in these two cardboard boxes." And he points out to two absolutely beaten up boxes in his room. And there's also a picture of Monty's family next to his computer. And he says that every month or so, I move to a different location. It tends to scare people to move when I move next to them. But within a month, I get to know how that part of the studio is functioning, how that particular game is doing, how do the people who are working there feel. And then that helps me to anticipate the future. So this is how you don't just sit in your cubicle and devise things. You actually walk around, go and work within your organization, work with others in different departments, and find ways to build those bridges. So you can't transform the culture sitting in your cubicle, but by having a ear to the ground, listening to your customers, seeking feedback. There's like a lot of other ways to do it. And I share a little bit more about it in some videos in my YouTube channel, which we later on put in that link on the chat. So again, in your work, are you the person who's like putting your head down, staying in your desk and doing your work? Are you building your bridges by keeping your ear on the ground, meeting people from other teams, other departments, and trying to find out get a more holistic sense of how your organization works and how you can work together? Again, this is something I leave with you for you to think about. How are you building this bridge, the bridge between wherever you are to the rest of your team? And even more so in hybrid world today, how are you creating those bridge opportunities when you are looking at your team that's working remote, sitting elsewhere? How do you align them to your common goals? So do think about it and work on that aspect. I want to move on to talking about bridging between teams. And this is really something that all of us have struggled with. Either sometimes we've been an individual contributor in the past, and then we go on and we have to lead these teams. We are working with people. And I get a lot of these kind of queries when I work with teams on how can we get teams to work together? They don't seem to be talking with each other. What's going on here? They don't get me. This is not me. They don't get me. Normally, arms raised and say, okay, I can't get this kind of thing, right? So who will champion your culture and values, not only to galvanize your teams together, but to excite them to really work together in a synchronous manner, even when they are asynchronous, to be inclusive, to have a diverse future? So I'm going to talk about two people now. The one on the left is Jo Allison. She, till September 2020, was the Chief Operating Officer of Tourism Holdings Limited. It's a global motorhome rental and sales organization. And they had grown exponentially in the last few years in terms of the structures and all that. But they had very siloed portals with the country managers running their own business units. So the challenge that they were grappling with was, how do we make it easy for our teams to understand systems thinking, and how should they think of the organization as a whole instead of just thinking of their department? So, or looking at, oh, everything is centralized, I'm not happy. Or at the other end of the spectrum, looking at, stay away from me, stay away from my business, it's mine to do, and things like that. So at the global conference, they got all the people together to help them understand what they wanted them to think about as a holistic business. So they created this model called GPS Navigator. And the business units had to think, do I have a problem and an opportunity which is unique to me? Or is it a common problem or opportunity? So do I need to get on and communicate so we can learn from each other? And do I need to collaborate, or do I just, manage it on my own? And what was happening is that because they were all siloed, lot of innovative opportunities which were happening in one part of the organization was not translating to the other part. But this GPS Navigator program really started those conversations that had been difficult for people to unravel in the past. They were trying to look at their own goals, but not look at organizational goals. And this really helped them to get to know the company, the culture, what is unique about us, and create areas for co-creation. So how do you provide that kind of a space where people can work together? How can you create your own version of GPS Navigator for your organization? I want to link to also our current reality now, which is the whole hybrid working. So whatever earlier used to be by osmosis, just being in the office together, we knew each other, we knew different teams, we knew ways of working. That's no longer happening. So the person on the right is Zarina Walker. She was the founder and CEO of Infini Edge Software. She was with that company for 20 years till 2016. At that time, she had a crisis in her hands. She had recently taken over the leadership of a combined team of engineers and creative people for a new project. Now, she had a deep experience leading the technical teams. So she thought, minimalistic management approach would work. I have figured out, the non-techies have an understanding of the technical process, and we can all just work by being together. Unfortunately, the team dynamics just went flat. The technical teams didn't have a problem coming into the room and talking about what's going on well, what's not going on well, and they were very comfortable with that style. Whereas for the creative teams going into the status meetings, it felt like they were under a firing range. They really hated it. Resentments were there. People stopped attending these status meetings. So the project, which should have taken off really well, just flustered. And there was a lot of frustration, a lot of animosity. And, and it all boiled down to, as Zarina reflects later, that there were no communication norms that were clearly established. She hadn't made the purpose of the meetings very clear. There was no agenda, or explaining that the agenda was not to criticize, but to help everybody get on to the same page. So she had to do something that she had never done before when she was heading only technical teams. She had to over-communicate. She had to sit down with both the groups of people, go over the purpose of the meeting. How did she expect the meetings to run, address the group's concern? And all that extra effort really paid off. So when they got on to the next project, it went so much smoother. So we were talking about bridges between teams. So you had teams which were, working siloed. You had teams which have different aspects, different departments. So how can you be the leader who's building those bridges? How can you put processes in place? What's your GPS navigator? How can you really over-communicate to build those connections? How can you practically do it at your work life? This is, again, something that I'm leaving you with for you to think about. And last but not the least is the bridges between companies, the fifth one. So we talked about bridges within us. We talked about bridges between people and groups when you have a lot of dissonance and conflict. We talked about bridges between teams. We talked about bridges between top management and employees. And now, how can companies work together? Companies, typically different companies, rival companies, they are in supply chain. How can they still manage to work together? And this is what happened though. Restaurant business, as you all are aware, was one of the most affected business during the pandemic. For the first few months, the shutters were down. And even when the outlets were allowed to reopen, the footfalls were unprecedentedly low, right? So there were a lot of huge job losses and layoffs, and that's exactly what McDonald's was going through. At the same time, Aldi, which is a German grocery chain, they were facing workforce shortages. McDonald's, on one hand, did not want to lose its valuable people. At the same time, it was not in a position to sustain them. So these two companies got together and they entered an agreement where McDonald's employees would work for Aldi's grocery chains on a voluntary basis. And the deployment of these employees at two of their stores, they had two stores, Aldi Sud and Aldi Nord, that created temporary employment for them and also saved their jobs. Now, the McDonald's employees were also given the freedom to come back to the parent company once the situation returned to normal. This way, McDonald's was able to avoid laying off their employees, and Aldi managed to fulfill its immediate requirement for talent, and talent which was extremely well trained in the service industry. So they got trained talent quickly, which they could use. McDonald's was able to save its employees from losing their jobs. So it was not just the question of failure of one turning out to be an opportunity for another. It was a win-win situation. So again, I want you to think about where in your work, when you're working with your organization, can you explore some of these bridges that you can build between companies? Within your company, where are all the opportunities? And, the future of work is going to be a cross-sector collaboration. It's not going to be a competition. Today, we are seeing in this conference, we have people from different walks of life coming in, joining, sharing, learning, right? Work is going to be an intricate dance across countries, across time zones, across cultures, across languages, and new technologies. So finding creative ways to connect and work towards a common goal is going to be the challenge. And what better way than building these bridges as a way to do that? I'm going to pause for now. Any thoughts, any questions, anything that you want to add on from your experience? And Tim, please feel free to hop in.
I guess there is a great question by Vladimir, who is asking, what would you recommend to support and make stronger the connections between team members?
I think these coffees and lunches, I'm referring back to Adam Grant's, that conversation that he talked about, where the sales teams within the organization just grab lunch together. A lot of the times when we work in formal situations, unless we bring in that informality into the world, we're not going to build these bridges and connections. So we want to engage. We want to connect as human beings first before we go in and connect as work folk. So one of the first few things is, if you have a team that you're working with, please go and have a coffee with them. Ask them about how they are doing. Get personal. Get, sensitive about how they are. Keep in touch with them in a different way. Not in that obvious kind of, I know a lot of the managers were doing these check-ins during COVID, not in that obvious kind of check-in kind of way, but really meaningful connections. Have a conversation with them, have a coffee with them, find out how they are doing. And I remember one of the CEOs of BBC, Greg Dyke, when he first took over, he did a 3-month tour of all his different units. And he just went with a notebook and a pen, and he would go and ask them, what's working well here and what is it that you want from me? And he would just make notes. And his strategic plan, which came after 3 months after all this conversation, was based on these feedbacks that were given. So listen to your team, have those coffees, build those connections. Does that make sense, Vladimir? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Soundari, that was lovely. If you follow finishing words from you, or
yeah, I actually kept that finishing word for something that we had discussed before, and I thought it was a perfect segue for that. But I wanted to, very important to really connect as we are connecting before. And I'm just thinking about our own experience, my own experience, Tim. I don't mind you coming on and staying in here. How do you connect before you conduct a meeting? What is all the process that you follow? What are the bridges that you're building? And Tim is a great example for it in terms of, starting the conversation for this particular conference way before, setting it up, sending in link, sending in the regular updates and all that. And how do you connect before you're correcting the person? And I'm taking it to the team perspective. When you're working with your team, don't come in with that thing of, okay, I need to tell you and you need to do this. How can you show before you tell? How can you connect before you can even start that conversation? And equally, how can you connect before you coach your team? People are going to trust not just because somebody is credible, but only because somebody is really empathetic, can reach out, can understand what you're talking about. And that's where the trust is going to, the famous trust equation, but the trust is going to build. I think the underlying part of it is empathetic connection. That's going to really make that part. So I will stop for now. I have a closing line, but that can be part of our conversation later, Tim, if that's okay.
Okay, we are closing this this first half of the first day with you, and I only have one question since there are no in the chat, but I guess that's a sign of that you got us thinking. I actually received a personal message just now when you were talking, saying, "Wow, architecture can also be a story." I guess that was referencing the story you began with the creating a path. So my question would be, by coming to this conference, you obviously proved that people can build bridges across borders, and that's a meaning that can build a lot of bridges. What is one more meaning that you would like to inspire people to believe that could build bridges in the world?
Yeah. I'll say that, and I will, for me, I think leaders can and should use stories to build bridges so that people can be more human at work. I always think about Brené Brown, our favorite. She says that stories are data with a soul. We need to work with data, right? Today, data is everywhere. Big data is important. I'm a finance person, so data is always on my mind. If somebody says, "Oh, this happened," I'm always asking, "Where's the impact? What's the measurement?" Even when we do work on D&I and all that. And I think data is important, but how can you create those insights and talk human? Because if you just share a number, if I had said that, that bridge, like say, for instance, even when I talked about Manji's bridge, if I ask you to tell me now, how long was that bridge that he built? We're not going to remember. But what do you remember, Tim, from that incident?
I would say that what stayed with me from that story is that the perseverance is attracting people to follow.
Yeah. Though a lot of people initially laughed at him, after he unfortunately passed away as well. But after that, the government has named that area after him. The government has given him some honor. They are now conscious of this road, which is leading to the hospital for others. So he's left a living legacy, which people are going to benefit. Sometimes it's almost like planting a seed now. You may not get the shade of the tree, but somebody will, right? And I'm just looking at the chat. I'm so sorry. I was, focusing on the conversation. I missed some of the chat, scrolling in the chat. I see some lovely comments about connecting, to yourself, to be a human, linking souls. Beautiful, some really lovely conversation there. I'm sorry that I didn't acknowledge it at that time. During lunch, people can discuss things and make deals. Absolutely. Some of these are seemingly simplistic ideas, but have a great impact.
That's true. There was this saying by one of our speakers. Well, I've learned it from him. There is a miracle behind the word simply. Simply listened. simply been there for you, simply pointed your attention to something. Exactly. So it's every time it's a miracle.
Yeah, totally. And I think sometimes some of these small things can make a big difference when you chip away. Like Manji's case, I was reading about this lady, Jessica Wade. She's a physicist at Imperial College of London, and she's working on making things energy efficient. So she goes to a conference and meets this climatologist called Kim Cobb. And then she comes back to her room and she tries researching about her, and she finds that there is no information available. So she decides to create a wiki page on Kim Cobb, so that a school kid somewhere who wants to research about sea urchins or anything will know where to go and find that amazing scientist who had done all that work but was not visible to the world. Today, if you're not on Google or if not on Wikipedia, you're not there, right? Unfortunately, that's the case. So she, over a period of, I think, few years, she has written 2,000 wiki pages on female scientists who are all rocking, doing things on whom there was no footprint at all. Now, 1 page a day, 1 page a night, which takes 2 hours of research and putting things together, may not seem much. But over a period of time, it's added up to 2,000 pages of wiki content, right? And now today, if I want to look at somebody and I say, I want to nominate them for a conference, I want to send them somewhere, it's going to be possible because of that kind of written text which is there available, which gives me all the links. It makes the citations easier. I get to know about people. And I think that's amazing. So making some of these small things is really big different. A lot can happen over coffee. A coffee chain's tagline somebody had written, and I think it's fabulous part of it.
What a great example. Thank you so much. Wow.
Pleasure being here. And I think, amazing audience. You have an amazing work that you do. There are, I think, human connections. Literally, you're this bridge across all our borders. So thank you for doing this for us. I'm happy to hang around in case there are any other questions which come in. Any other thoughts from you, Tim? What is a bridge that for you personally connected? Or even I'd like the audience also to tell me, maybe on the chat, what is that one bridge that really connected with you? It could be your particular situation or something that you're seeing at your workplace.
Okay, I have this story I can tell really quickly before the break. So I was coaching this one leader. They had a project where top 100 people were coming to inspire their subordinates to join a learning program. And he was sharing this story about a time when he was really conflicting with his subordinate. And the first time he told the story was more or less abstract and vague. Like, yeah, we had a conflict, and then I changed my strategy, and the conflict resolved. You don't get a lot out of it. But when I started digging deeper and he opened up, turned out that he was only near 30 years old in a manufacturing company, and he became a leader only 1 year prior to this. So he wasn't like very experienced. His employee, who was older than him, was really opposing him, and this leader told a story of how he put a task, and instead of doing this task, this subordinate came to him and said, this is my resignation, and gave him the paper and just shut the door after him. So this leader didn't take the bluff, and on emotions he said, okay, come in, you need to re-sign it on an official blank, and off you go. And this bluff didn't work. But what struck me with the story was that after this employee came back, he wasn't angry because he was really fearful of losing his job. He was actually not writing a resignation paper. He was asking a transfer. But this leader, with all his emotions, he said, no transfer for you, no places in this department, only resignation. Would you like it? And this was really tough. But then they had this connection moment when the leader was not like shouting, he was listening. And it turned out that this toxic employee was not toxic. He had problems in his family. And at the same time, he was worried sick about how he's going to provide for his family. He made an agreement with the leader. He they shook hands, and it got better and better and better afterwards. After hearing this story, what I really liked about it was that this leader didn't even once say toxic employee. He said the toxicity of this employee. He tore apart the wall that said this man is a problem, and he was starting to live the story, this man has a problem. And this for me is a key for narrative thinking. Turning apart problems and people. That's the only way we can build bridges, with the people, not with the problem. So
beautifully said. Beautifully said. We tend to label people, right? And we tend to judge people by really going behind with intent and, listening. And I see some really nice ones about building the bridge within ourselves. Latimer writes about it.
Exactly.
Smile as the great bridge. I think absolutely focusing on the identity to the behavior, moving away from the person, not making it personal, but solving for the problem part of it. And I think one of the bridges that I didn't mention, and I have my mom here with me now, staying with me for some time, which is wonderful, is also the bridges across generations. I was working with tech product managers in a program, and we were talking about AI, and now there's, of course, a lot of talk on ChatGPT and everything else. And we were talking about how can you demystify some of this language for everybody. We don't want to stay in this isolated corner saying these are the techies and these are non-techies kind of thing, right? Everybody can use technology. Technology is an enabler. So there was this guy who was like his grandmom. He was talking to his grandmom and one of the guys in the program. And the grandmom says, so tell me more about what are you learning as a product manager? What is it all about? And he says, I'm learning about machine learning. She says, what is machine learning? I mean, I don't know that word. Explain that to me. And he says, Grandmom, it's like, how when you're making a recipe, you make something for us, and then you bring it to us and we eat it and we say, oh, that was too spicy, or there was less salt or more salt. Then you go back and you iterate, you change it, and you make those changes and make the product even better. That's exactly what we do. And that was such a common way of explaining something, that how does the machine learn and how does it make those corrections and how does it come about? So I think as machines keep getting better, we can only be better humans and build those bridges of connection across generations, across people, across borders. So thanks for being that enabler, Tim. I enjoyed, and what a lovely group of participants, commenting, sharing their thoughts and internalizing it, which is fantastic, and so much to learn from them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It is always such a pleasure. Soundary, thank you so much for being with us. Please feel free to connect to the other days, and we'll be getting to the break. So thank you so much.
I will. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the sessions. Bye.
Bye. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this first half of the conference, guys. We are going to take a break until 5 p.m. Moscow time now. And let's just continue building bridges. Look at how many awesome people are in this chat tonight, or today, or to time. I'll see you in the evening, guys. Thank you so much.